Welcome to this edition of our Committee on the Present Danger China's webinars on the unrestricted warfare the Chinese Communist Party has been waging against the United States of America for decades. My name is Frank Gaffney. I am the Vice Chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger China, and very proud to be your moderator. We will be speaking about a number of subjects related to the unrestricted warfare of communist China in the high frontier, in space and from space. What they have in mind, the Chinese communists, how they are amassing the capabilities to achieve what they have in mind, and what it will mean for us if they succeed, notably in their determination to achieve a position on the moon, perhaps to the exclusion of us and everybody else, for that matter. We have assembled an extraordinary group of national security practitioners to comment on this important topic. I want to just say that at the outset, we have been inspired greatly in turning to this topic this week by an important special that our friend and one of the country's preeminent business journalists, Maria Bartiromo of Fox News, Fox Business, Fox Nation, streamed on the Fox Nation platform. It's called The Enemy Above, and it's the third part of a now three-part series entitled Underwriting the Enemy. And we will be hearing from one of the, we hope two of the important contributors to that program, but one who has in particular been intimately involved in making the case that in so many areas of unrestricted warfare, including that involved with the military pursuit of dominance in space, it's been made possible by underwriting from mostly unwitting American investors, thanks to sweetheart arrangements between Wall Street denizens who manage their money and the Chinese Communist Party, who are exploiting such funds to our great detriment. I want to express deep appreciation to Maria Bartiromo, her willingness to tackle these topics and do so in such an extraordinarily high quality way. In the previous two programs of this series, Underwriting the Enemy, airing the program not only on Fox Nation behind a subscription paywall, but also on Fox Business. And I believe it's the case that this program will similarly be aired and available to the Fox Business audience for free, hopefully in the very near future. Suffice it to say, if you have not seen this film, let alone the previous ones, I would offer my advice: subscribe to Fox Nation, if only for this purpose. It is a very thoughtful, very highly well-informed and high quality, high production values, I think is the technical term for it, treatment of a complex subject of absolutely surpassing importance to the vital security and, for that matter, economic interests of the United States. We're going to hear first, as we often do in these webinars, from a man whose experience as a top naval intelligence officer informs the threat assessment that we are going to be teasing out in several of our presentations. But to begin with, we will hear from Captain James Fanell, United States Navy retired. In his last duty station, he was the Chief of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Navy's Pacific Command. excuse me, Pacific Fleet. He has also gone on to other things, including serving at the moment as a senior fellow at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, and to a prodigious output, notably through uh, outlets like American Greatness, where he has a column, and a book he jointly authored with Dr. Bradley Fair entitled Embracing Communist China, America's Greatest Strategic Failure. We'll go to a short video that we extracted from a powerful interview that he did with me recently on our program, Securing America on Real America's Voice. Let's go to that clip now.
Space is as you've probably heard the saying, the ultimate high ground when it comes to warfare. And all of our systems inside the U.S. Department of Defense are reliant upon space-based assets, satellites and precision targeting and navigation tools that come from space that allow us to know where we are precisely on the Earth, allows our ships and aircraft to be able to navigate from point A to point B, and allows, more importantly, the ordnance that we fire to get to the right intended target for the right effect. So it's really fundamentally important. And we have concepts like in the U.S. Navy, the CEC, this Combined Electronic Center. I'm getting the acronym wrong, but it's this ability where everybody's seeing the same information. A lot of that is really dependent upon space. It's absolutely critical, and China knows that. And so what they're trying to do is distributed maritime operations is another concept where everything is distributed, but we can all see the same data because it's all being relayed to us through space. If that gets taken away, we become blind, one, to where the threat is coming at us, so we could be defeated, but also we can become ineffective in what we're doing. So it's absolutely critical. Last month, the International Institute for Strategic Studies put out a report that talked about China's telemetry tracking and command capabilities in space diplomacy. And they just listed some basic facts. China has 9 domestic telemetry tracking and command stations, 4 domestic satellite launch sites, 5 sea-based launch barges, 2 aerospace control centers, one in Xi'an and Beijing, several SIGINT satellites in low Earth orbit and geostationary orbit, over 18 overseas telemetry tracking and command stations that the PRSC has varying degrees of access to. They have 4 operational space event support ships, and 1 is being unleashed this year, so they'll have 5. And the PRC has space partnerships with at least 16 countries in Africa and 11 more in Latin America. So just from an infrastructure standpoint of space, that one report talks about how comprehensive the PRC's commitment to space is. So it goes from, being able to make sure they can launch stuff into space, then what they put in space can track us, track our ships, track our aircraft, and then they can also take out our own satellites, and then you talk about going to the moon and Mars. So it's a comprehensive agenda to be able to dominate space and to blind us.
Thank you, Captain. This is just a sort of primer, but also a foretaste of what we're going to hear next from a man who has devoted much of his extraordinary professional career on discerning what the Chinese have in mind beyond some of the obvious indicators in terms of dominating what has been called the Earth-Moon axis. This is part of our strategic environment that is not always understood as such, certainly by most laymen in our country. But the Chinese certainly appreciate it enormously and are acting to exercise full control over it. As Richard Fisher made very clear in his contributions to Maria Bartiromo's special, an important piece of the factual underpinning of the assessment that we are in a space race, certainly with respect to the moon, but arguably much more broadly, that Rick makes, I think, as well as anyone. He is the senior fellow of the specializing in Asian military affairs at the International Assessment and Strategy Center. He's associated with Global Taiwan Institute and is the author most recently of China's Military Modernization, Building for Regional and Global Reach. The next edition might want to augment that to galactic reach to be more accurate in terms, especially of the subject of today's briefing. Rick, it is tremendous to have you with us. We thank you for doing so on very short notice, but this program would not be nearly as well informed were it not for your contribution to it. So please take over. The floor is yours, sir.
Frank, thank you for inviting me to your stellar panel today. It's quite an honor, as it was certainly an honor and a privilege to contribute to Maria Bartiromo's program on Fox Nation. Let's make it very simple. China requires hegemony over the Earth, Moon, Mars system in order to reinforce its ambitions for hegemony on Earth. Chinese Communist Party's goal for hegemony on Earth is quite clear. It has built a global economic powerhouse of commercial outreach around the world. This commercial outreach is led to the development of myriad political networks in most countries on this planet. And this agenda combines to facilitate the spread of Chinese strategic and military power. The military follows commerce, follows the flag. That's holds true for the Chinese Communist Party. It seeks to project its military power. It doesn't care how it will do that. It will kill millions of people on Taiwan to turn Taiwan into a veritable aircraft carrier for global military and space power projection. It will go north to Okinawa, conquer that island, go south to the Philippines, conquer those islands. It won't stop until every democracy is under its dominion, including ours. But in order to make sure that it can sustain its hegemony on Earth, it needs hegemony in space. Think of it. If China achieves hegemony on Earth, is in control of our prosperity, our freedom, what's our last redoubt? Well, our last redoubt is to try to gather the resources we need to build a resistance from space, from the moon, potentially from Mars. And the Chinese Communist Party understands this and seeks to deny that option to not just the United States, but to humanity. And so how is China proceeding to build for hegemony in space? Well, if you've watched Maria's special, you'll have some understanding of the degree to which the People's Liberation Army, controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, has already projected into space about 1,000 satellites, and which will grow prodigiously once China starts lofting its mega satellite constellations like the SpaceX Starlink. There are probably about 3 to 4 Chinese companies planning their own mega constellations. We've heard quite a bit from US government and private sector analysts over the last decade and a half about China's military projection into space. The 2007 satellite intercept that was preceded by 4 other practice anti-satellite missions. And now the proliferation of anti-satellite technologies to include both active and passive anti-satellite technologies. And on top of that, China has targeted domination of the moon. Its moon program began in the early 1990s, along with its manned space program. And China has already put 5, 6 landers on the moon, numerous small rovers, and is now assembling the means to by 2029, 2030, to start to put its own people on the moon. And we shouldn't forget who those people are. Chinese astronauts all belong to the astronaut corps of the People's Liberation Army. First and foremost, their mission is to defend the security and the interests of the Chinese Communist Party, no matter what they be. They are soldiers. When they go to the moon, they will be soldiers for the Chinese Communist Party. And just in the last 3 weeks or so, China has tested a stationary escape system for its Long March 10, its new Mengzhou manned space ship. Just late last week, it tested a version of its manned moonlander called Lanyue. It has a special test facility that simulates low gravity, and the full scale lander was tested in that regard. Just yesterday, China conducted a stationary test of its large space launch vehicle that will be carrying the Mengzhou and the Lanyue to lunar orbits and to the moon. The static test apparently was successful, and all of these pieces will start coming together next year, when it's expected that the Long March 10 will begin suborbital and then orbital testing, and we can expect probably an unmanned Chinese moonlander test by 2027, 2028, preparing for the manned event in 2029 or 2030. But even before Chinese astronauts begin arriving on the moon, China will deploy a constellation of satellites around the moon. These satellites will be for navigation, for communication, and observation. They will form an initial network for controlling what happens on the moon. They can be joined by combat satellites, and this constellation will be extended to Mars, probably by about the turn of the decade, in preparation for China's manned Mars program. And all of this, of course, is controlled by the People's Liberation Army for the benefit of China's strategic goals, which, as I've already mentioned, include establishing hegemony over the Earth, Moon, Mars system. The manned space program, the manned Moon and manned Mars program, basically provide a cover for the People's Liberation Army to deploy military assets amongst the so-called scientific assets in order to be able to counter or American space assets, and also to control access to the moon and access to the Mars, which in a sense, China wants to control humanity's access to the future space economy, estimated to eventually amount to trillions of dollars in annual commerce. China wants to control this. It wants to have the power to deny this wealth to the democracies. It wants to be able to preserve its dictatorship over the Chinese people by ensuring that no other power on Earth is able to access the power of space, the wealth of space, in order to oppose its hegemony on Earth.
Rick, if you are completed, thank you. Uh, that hegemony on Earth is, of course, very much uppermost in our minds. The issues of the wealth of space that you've touched on, I think, is something we're going to want to explore with you in Q&A. If you can stick around, we've got two other presenters we want to hear from before we get to that, though. One is another individual, as I mentioned earlier, who was instrumental in, I think, helping prepare and participate in this important program, Maria Bartiromo's special, The Enemy Above. That would be Roger Robinson Jr., another very important contributor to these programs and the work of the Committee on the Present Danger China, a man who served President Reagan as his senior director for international economic affairs on the National Security Council. He had a very substantial role in helping President Reagan craft the strategy for taking down the last totalitarian communist regime that sought our destruction, namely the Soviet Union. Subsequent to his time in the Reagan administration, he served for many years, both as the chairman and the vice chairman of the U.S. China Commission on Economic Security Review Commission, excuse me. A wonderful sort of source of second opinions that the Congress has mandated and supported over the years. It's often done very important work in challenging what we've been assured is true about the Chinese Communist Party and its activities. Roger has been associated with the Prague Security Studies Institute, which, together with the Coalition for a Prosperous America, just yesterday released an important report to which he will make reference, I think, in the course of his remarks, which we pre-taped earlier today as, again, part of our program, Securing America, Real America's Voice. We're going to go to his video input for today's program and thank him for that he rendered on Maria's earlier in the week. Let's go to Roger Robinson's video now.
There's no question that China is determined to achieve space hegemony. They have looked at this as the primary asymmetric vulnerability of the United States that they can exploit to not only keep up with us, but to defeat us, both regionally and perhaps even globally, if they're able to execute their strategy in space, which is laden with counter-space weapons. So consistent with this goal, you can imagine their determination to win the moon race, which we have been hobbled in our technical ability and as well as funding. The Artemis program has been behind. We are not on a positive trajectory right now. We will need a push from the president and the administration in a priority resource funding mode in order to win the moon race. Now, the consequences of not doing so are dire. It is the strategic high ground. The Chinese, if they land on the moon, it will be in the dark side of the moon, probably the Shackleton crater, which is the most promising from the perspective of water, and being a lasting outpost for other travel in the solar system. So it's an essential way station, but it's also the life-giving quality of the moon could be there. They will plant their flag and on day one execute an instant replay of their illegal activities in the South China Sea, where they claimed the entire sea that controls 3 to 5 trillion a year in trade, virtually the entire South China Sea. And like that circumstance, they'll demand that we have their permission henceforth in order to orbit, land on, or operate in strategic sectors of the moon, like the one I've just mentioned. Now, you can imagine what an intolerable circumstance this is. I think they'll bring direct ascent missiles, co-orbital ASATs. They will bring high-energy lasers. They will militarize the moon at flank speed. There's nothing going on here that's really geological, scientific, benign, the way we tend to explore in the moon circumstance and others. So this is a very perilous circumstance we're in right now. And so you can imagine with Golden Dome as well, trying to protect our country from incoming ICBMs, largely through space-based sensors and systems, what it would be like to have a set of missile systems beyond the Golden Dome, looking down on it from the ultimate high ground of the moon. So there are lots of different dimensions to this. Palmer Luckey of Anduril Industries in the documentary special, The Enemy Above, that you were just referring to at Fox Nation, hosted by Maria Bartiromo, stated very plainly, this is an aircraft carrier times 1,000. Now, I probably would use a little different analogy, but the point he's trying to make is this is the immensity of the strategic value of getting to the moon. First, it's a job that has to be done by us, as we've risen to other such challenges in the past, when the chips are down, and they are down now. This is something that the president and the administration has to enunciate, in my opinion, right away in a kind of Manhattan Project, Los Alamos context, if we're going to ensure victory in the high frontier. And I would just point, Frank, to a report that we just completed at the Prague Security Studies Institute after 15 years of steady research on the matter, as well as our partner, the Coalition for a Prosperous America. It's on both of our websites. In the case of PSSI, it's pssi.cz and prosperousamerica.org. But you can get your hands on this 17-page study. Why it's important. We talk about the relationship between what's going on up there and what's going on here on Earth. I would just say a quick word about what the Chinese are doing in the space domain on Earth. We looked at their efforts to penetrate 123 aspiring space nations, folks that don't have much money, that don't have much technical skill. And their approach to an international space partnership, as they called it, which are proliferating to scores of countries as we speak, is along the following lines. They'll come in and say, look, have we got a deal for you? We're going to get you the satellite. We're going to provide launch services. We're going to build the ground station. We're going to give you our positioning, navigation, and timing service, PATO. I'll get back to that in a moment. We're going to give you the operating personnel, the training, and subsidized financing, so that it's just $10 down and you've got yourself a space program. There are a couple of small caveats. One, you will have sole source contracts with us henceforth, meaning your space sector is now ours. And the second is that you'll be voting with us in all multilateral space fora, particularly those that control the governing standards and norms for space. We want those to be our terms of references, not the democratic countries of the world. So thanks in advance. You'll be signing on with us in an effort to achieve those majorities in places like the UN. So that's what we found here. More troubling still, Frank, not surprising to you, is that the Chinese military companies, space companies, who are the ones that are the front organizations for the CCP and the PLA, who are out there under PLA control, as is the entire Chinese space program, and they are attracting funds from our capital markets as well as our private equity funds. They have a number of subsidiaries, if not the companies themselves, that are listed on various exchanges in the world. We're buying their stocks and bonds, if you can believe it. We are funding in no small part the Chinese military space program today, run by the PLA. We are funding our potential demise in the moon race. Now, it sounds like a grandiose statement. It sounds a little bit of hyperbole here, but I can demonstrate all of this with empirical fact. That's the beauty of finance. It's a two-party thing. We can prove what we're saying, and this is the way it is. So the folks in the audience right now, unwittingly, in their index funds in particular, are helping fund and fuel the Chinese space hegemony that they seek, the moon as their domain that they seek. And it is Wall Street, yet again, and the private equity companies that you need to look to, both asset managers, index providers. They loaded up on thousands of Chinese companies that are in our markets, some 5,000, that are sitting there collecting money and being traded in the world's most prestigious markets, which gives them entree everywhere in the world with our good housekeeping seal of approval. You know this, but you do, as you properly pointed out, need to look at this holistically. This is of a much bigger piece of funding the PLA and its modernization efforts through billions, scores of billions of dollars annually, without which they couldn't be anywhere near the peer competitor threat that they are.
Roger Robinson, thank you. I'm so appreciative that you were able to tie in that bit about the financing of our demise. That is a hallmark of course, your work and that of our Committee on the Present Danger, China. We're going to hear from another member of that committee, Captain Fanell and Rick Fisher. I'm very really pleased to say are also members of the committee. Roger has been collaborating with it for years, but from a sort of council view. But Greg Autry is truly one of the country's preeminent experts on space policy, space programs. He's had a distinguished record of public service, notably as a White House liaison to NASA during the first Trump term. He has also been, during that term, the nominee of the president to become NASA's chief financial officer. These days, he is an associate provost for space commercialization and strategy at the University of Central Florida, as well as the vice president of the National Space Society. He is the co-author with Dr. Peter Navarro of Red Moon Rising, How America Will Beat China on the Final Frontier. It's appropriate that we hear from a man who is a bit more, shall we say, optimistic about how we will fare in this competition with China to bring to closure this particular series of rather dire estimates of what the Chinese are up to and our ability to contend with it. Greg Autry, welcome back. It's good to have you with us, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. I hate to rain on your Pollyanna parade, but I think the previous speakers were dead right on target. And despite the fact of writing a pretty optimistic book a year ago, I am less sanguine today than where I was when I wrote the book. So first of all, let me just talk about the thesis for the book. Red Moon Rising, my co-author is Peter Navarro. You might know that Peter and I worked together, 13 years ago no more than that, 15 years ago on Death by China, the book, and then the film, which was endorsed by then Citizen Trump at the time, and pretty controversially made the assertion that China was not our good friend in trade, in military cooperation, in environmental cooperation, and a number of other factors. At that time, there was a broad assumption among American intellectuals, in particular among American business leaders, and certainly in American academia, that working with China was the best thing that we'd ever done. Peter and I had come to the very stark conclusion that we were all being hoodwinked, and that we would find out that, in fact, China was actually operating a campaign of total warfare against us. And we started talking about this in the mid-2000s, which didn't make us the most popular people in our academic institutions, which were pulling in a lot of money from China and very eager to fill up as many faculty positions and student chairs with Chinese at the time. So we had a lot of background on that. I wrote a whole chapter in space for Peter's book before Death by China, and then I put a space chapter in Death by China as well, and then decided it was time to write a whole book. Now, when I was writing this book in 2023, several things were going on. One, the U.S. commercial space sector was booming and doing really well for a number of good policy choices that were made over time, and I've got to frankly give credit to some extent to every president, going back to Ronald Reagan, who established a couple of entities in the U.S. government to handle commercial space regulation and facilitation: the Office of Space Commerce, Department of Commerce, the Office of Commercial Space Transportation, and the Department of Transportation were both created back in the 80s, which was really farsighted. And the fact that they were there and relatively well run allowed us to get a jump start on every other country in that important commercial sector. So that was going along pretty well. In 2016, I had the honor to serve on the Trump transition team as part of the NASA agency review team, and helped set the really fundamentally disruptive Trump space policy. That space policy had made a bigger change in the way the United States approaches space broadly, including civil space, which is NASA, and military space, DoD, and commercial space that's handled out of Commerce and FAA and FCC, than had been done since the 1960s. No administration pushed us forward in space as much as the Trump administration did, going all the way back to the Kennedy years. We had 8 really important presidential executive orders, or space policy directives, that, among other things, committed the United States to returning to the moon in a permanent and sustainable manner, to take advantage of the economic opportunities there for the U.S. It's very different from the Kennedy mission of sending a man to the moon and bringing him back safely so that we could say we did it, right? Nonetheless, though, that was important. And if you look at what happened in Space Race 1.0, you can see many similar things lining up in Space Race 2.0. And this is the point of this book. In Space Race 1.0, the goal was simply to go to the moon and come back alive. Kennedy laid down a very clear challenge to the Soviet Union and basically said it would prove our abilities. In his famous speech at Rice, he said, "We do these things not because they're easy, but because they are hard, and they'll demonstrate our economic and technical and political ability to execute." And he said to the world, "Here we are, we're going to show you, and guess what? The Ruskies can't do it." And he was right. Okay. And von Braun had talked him into this because von Braun was convinced the Ruskies couldn't do it. And when we did it, it was a sea change in geopolitical opinion. Up until that point, the Soviet Union was ascendant in so many people's eyes. They had seen the future and it worked. And there were many people ready to give up on the decadent West. And we were just going to fade into history and be replaced by this scientific socialist future vision out of Moscow. When the Russians failed in the moon race, the world noticed. It was the single most watched, of course, TV and radio event in human history, and probably the single most fundamentally cohesive moment for humanity. And it changed the perception of the Soviet Union. And you can almost chart the decline of the Soviet Union from that moment in 1969. Things began to go downhill throughout the 70s and 80s, and the Soviet Union, of course, was no more about 20 years after that event. Within the Soviet Union, there was a similar perception of we failed, we can't do it, and it was morally disruptive to the entire empire. So here we are today. Whether you like it or not, and I have to take some responsibility for being on that team of people that advised the president to go do this, we are committed to returning to the moon. And it was very clear that we were going to do it before the Chinese. And in 2016, I had no fear we were going to do this for the Chinese. Chinese were interesting. They were moving forward methodically. But at that point, they had launched a handful of people into low Earth orbit, and there was no way they were going to land something on the moon. I would have also absolutely predicted that President Trump would have been celebrating American landing on the moon and the beginning of a permanent presence on the moon during his second administration, meaning he would have done it by 2024. However, here we are, and we're not there, right? And we're not only not there, we're not close to being there. We've used the last 4 years to continue policies, and I've got to say, thank you to the Biden team. They didn't cancel anything that Trump had put forward in space, including the Space Force, including the Artemis program. But on the other hand, as I wrote in a editorial that amazingly the Washington Post published, having Kamala Harris as space czar meant nothing happened because she didn't do her job. She didn't hold the meeting she was required to hold, and she had no interest in the space program. So she wasn't going to get bothered about it enough to actually cancel something. So everything just kind of continued. The people at NASA did their job, but without any sense of alacrity or fire under them. So we've fallen way behind. When I wrote this book, I thought for sure President Trump is coming back in. Our commercial sector's hitting on all cylinders, and the Chinese, while they're getting pretty good, are still slower than us and will move quickly. We're not quite there yet. We need to have a national commitment and an agreement between the White House and Congress on how we get to this point. And in my opinion, there is no second place. There is no silver medal in the space race. There is last place. And that's what the Soviet Union learned. And I believe the Chinese are, as noted, at least on track. They've been testing their lunar lander. We're nowhere near testing our lunar lander. Our spacesuit isn't quite ready. Our rockets are expensive, the ones we're planning to use for the moon, and our capsule has some challenges, but we could do this if we really got it together and said we want to. But at the current time, we're still kind of floating, and we don't have that fire and that alacrity to execute. The important thing is we have the commercial sector that is hitting on all cylinders. When I wrote Death by China, there were 1,000 satellites in orbit around the Earth, and every year approximately 150 or so new satellites were added to orbit, most of which were there to replace something previously. And there was no significant growth in what was happening there. The United States had 0% of the commercial launch market, meaning if a Thai television station wanted to launch a satellite, or an Israeli communications company wanted to launch a satellite, or an American imaging company wanted to launch that, they did not use an American rocket to do it. They did it on European rockets, Russian rockets, and God forbid, Chinese rockets. We had 0%. Commercial sector stepped up, particularly with the efforts of Elon Musk at SpaceX. And by the time I was sitting on the presidential transition team in 2016, the United States had 70% of the global commercial launch market. Today, basically, the only reason anybody else launches anything besides American commercial companies is because they're subsidized national champions. There is no justification for a European launch service or a Russian space program. Frankly, at this point, on an economic basis, the US is completely dominant technologically, inefficiency-wise, and by volume. And there are 10,000 plus satellites in orbit now, an order of magnitude growth. Elon plans to launch 40,000 satellites. Just a couple of days ago, I watched his rocket launch Jeff Bezos's Kuiper satellites, which will also include thousands and thousands of satellites. We're at a point where amazing things can happen with our commercial sector. But we've got to have government policies that think strategically and make sure that we leverage those to beat our international competitors, because we have learned, as detailed in Death by China and so many other industries, that if we are not strategic, that the Chinese will destroy our excellent companies. We watch this happen in steel. We watch this happen in toys. We watch this happen in consumer electronics. We've watched this happen in apparel. We've watched this happen in the entire supply chain for Home Depot, right? Any industry, no matter how good the American companies are, will be destroyed when a national state competitor targets those companies one by one with price gouging, price dumping on the market below cost for as long as it takes to destroy the American company, subsidized purchasing of the American company, infiltration of the American company to steal their intellectual property, both with human assets and via cyber attacks, and just all sorts of sabotage around the world to make sure the American companies fail. And they have just done this so well. Solar panels, perfect example of exactly how not to help an American market succeed. We basically pumped a lot of money into R&D side of solar panels for years, and then into a few specific companies under the Obama administration, but we let the Chinese come and just rape those companies, hack them with cyber tools, infiltrate them with spies, destroy them in the market with price dumping, and then we let them buy those companies and take their intellectual property to China. And we let Wall Street invest capital in the Chinese competitors that were being backed by the Chinese government. So the Chinese government didn't even have to fund the destruction of the business we had created. China is on target for commercial space exactly the same way. And they intend to destroy these American companies. And I have every reason to believe they will if we don't react strategically. If we take the libertarian, just get government out of the way and free market magic will happen, I tell you, we're going to end up exactly where we were with every other industry that they wiped out. I'm the biggest believer ever in free market competition within a free market. But there's a reason that we don't let our urban businesses do business with the mafia, right? Because of the problem with racketeering. And if there's a competitor who's willing to break all the rules and break kneecaps and do whatever it takes to destroy your businesses, you can't allow them to be in a market with those folks. You have to protect them from the bad guys. And sometimes you've got to be America World Police. And that's where we are with the commercial space industry, still ahead, but at risk. The Chinese are absolutely after it in the worst way. And on the government, civil and military side, the Chinese are catching up with us and preparing to leapfrog us in every way. They have successfully landed robotic landers on the moon multiple times in recent years, bringing back samples. Meanwhile, the United States has actually had failures trying to land on the moon using our new commercial landers, which is fine, and it's part of an iterative process of learning. But in the world's vision, China looks good, and they're ready to execute on a human moon landing. China has returned samples from the moon. We had to just cancel our Mars sample return program because it had grown too bloated, inefficient, and over budget. And frankly, the Chinese are going to beat us to that Mars sample return without a doubt. So at this moment, I am concerned, waiting to hopefully see an announcement of a new NASA administrator shortly, and hopefully the establishment of a National Space Council like we had during the first Trump administration that will lay out strategic national goals and move us forward with a sense of alacrity. there's some really good things coming out of the Trump team recently, most notably some changes announced 2 days ago in an executive order to address regulation issues within the commercial space industry, and most specifically take that Office of Space Commerce, restore it to its position, reporting to the Secretary of Commerce, to create new capabilities for the Office of Commercial Space Transportation and create a new individual position to report to Sean Duffy, that head of DOT, who is also the interim head of NASA for Trump. Super excited about that. Really great idea to fund nuclear power systems in space, starting with nuclear power systems on the surface of the moon. Really critical to fulfilling the president's commitment to a sustainable presence on the moon, because the moon has nights that last 16 days long and get to hundreds of degrees below zero. You've got to have a consistent power source, and it can't be solar because it's nighttime for 16 days. So nuclear is super important there. I'm excited about the direction we're going. We need to really kick it up a notch, and soon. That's what I've got, Frank. Happy to take
Greg,
it.
thank you. You've set a very rich table for us. I'm delighted that Rick Fisher is still with us, and we can have a bit of back and forth. And thank you for, the corrective right out of the gate that you're not Pollyannish about this at all. And I'd like to focus, if I could, on both the Chinese side of the ledger and our own, to sort of round out our conversation here in the next few minutes. Roger Robinson talked about the Chinese being able to, essentially dominate. And I said, I think the Earth-Moon axis. I meant the Earth-Moon system. You've added Mars into the mix. The reported timeline for the Chinese getting to the moon is 2030. I guess I'd like to start by asking both of you, do you think that's in fact what they're shooting for, or do you expect to see them getting there sooner? And again, sooner than us, more to the point. Should we start with you, Rick?
Sure, yeah. Many Chinese unofficial commentators expect an initial formal manned moon landing by 2029. The Chinese officially say 2030, but it wouldn't be beyond Chinese capabilities to stage something of a surprise and get there up to a year before that point. Now, of course, we'll also
before 2030 or before 2029?
Yeah, before 2030, but we'll also be seeing from now until 2030 a kind of constant stream of test exercises. The Space Launch Vehicle will go into low Earth orbit. It will conduct circumlunar missions around the moon. It will bring unmanned passenger capsules, unmanned moon landing vehicles to lunar orbit. There may even be an unmanned landing of the moon lander, and then a recovery back into lunar orbit. All of this will be trumpeted via the Chinese propaganda edifice, which is deep and massive. And it will end up being a constant cacophony of inevitable Chinese progress towards the moon, whereas as much as we admire all of his accomplishments, SpaceX, Starship blow up on the Earth or in orbit, have yet to succeed in achieving one orbit. Blue Origin, the other candidate for a moon landing vehicle, is making some progress, but not very rapidly. And it does not appear that the American current goal of sending people to the moon by 2027 is going to be met. Now, I'm happy to be wrong in that estimate, but The pieces are not coming together very quickly. And our enemies, China and Russia, fully understand that creating military incidents on Earth, creating wars on Earth, is a sure way to divert American attention and American funding away from the goal of getting to the moon and then getting to Mars.
Greg, your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm just going to be super cynical and say I would gladly put every dollar that I have on the bet that China will beat us to the moon. That's where we are right now. That's not destiny, but that is the direction we're heading right now. And most of this is not entirely a technical challenge. It's a policy challenge, and it's a way of thinking about the problem. And I want to be fair. We mentioned SpaceX in Blue Origin. They're both developing landers that are far, far more capable than the Chinese lander. The SpaceX lander will put 100 metric tons on the moon. I would have to look up the capacity of the Chinese lander, but you're talking probably a handful of tons at the most, and you're probably talking about a couple of people versus potentially you could put, frankly, dozens of people on the moon with the SpaceX vehicle. The Blue Origin lander is going to land considerably more than the Chinese in weight, be reusable, and also be capable of carrying 4 or more people to the surface of the moon. Both of these systems are just much more sophisticated than Chinese. But my question is, when the Chinese beat us, is Congress, the next Congress, mind you, not this one, whatever Congress exists in 2028 or 2029, or the White House, whatever White House we have in 28, 29, going to keep funding our silver medal effort? I don't think so. I think that's very dubious. I fear we followed what exactly the Soviets did when they lost the first time and said, we're not putting good money after bad. There's nothing to show here. We've got real problems right here at home, many of which the Chinese are helping to create and exacerbate intentionally every day. And let's deal with those problems. So I believe we have to be both first and best. And right now we're on track to be best, and that's not good enough. There are ways to be first.
Greg, let me ask you to respond to something that Rick was talking about earlier, and Roger to some extent as well, and that is this idea that the Chinese would have of actually exercising military control of the moon. Rick, I hadn't heard about this idea of having orbiting satellites around the moon, exercising that before they get actually physically on it. But could you comment on whether that's the trajectory as you see it that they're on, and what are the implications of that? Congress may not have, much of a say at that point. Would they?
So there's military control, meaning you have the physical kinetic power to stop other people. And then there's legalistic control, right? And they're going for legalistic control first. So there's ways that they can essentially draw dotted red lines around the surface of the moon by creating exclusion zones for their scientific efforts or whatever it is they say they're doing on the moon by getting there first, and then get to the key areas, because assets on the moon are not equally distributed. They're highly concentrated, particularly around the south polar regions, both for the valuable water ice, which provides water and oxygen, and for propellant, and for metallic materials that could be super valuable. In orbit, I wrote a series of 4 articles in Forbes last year on lunar orbital congestion. There are only 4 stable orbits around the moon. The moon is very different from the Earth from an orbital dynamics perspective because of these large concentrations of metals and a big bulk near the south pole of the moon and a couple other places called mass cons that create irregularities in the lunar orbit. So there aren't a lot of good orbits, and you could, in fact, fill them up pretty quickly and make it impossible for anybody else to put orbital assets in. Once you control that high ground, you're perfectly capable of controlling what happens on the surface from a military standpoint.
So Rick, to the extent that we're focused now on potentially losing the moon, what's the right response as you see it? Is it, as Roger has indicated, a kind of, I think he called it Manhattan Project on both Maria's special end here. And is the kind of thing that Greg has talked about in terms of our commercial sector being able to step up and overcome some of the problems with the government effort, likely to be the way to go. And what inducements, as you see it, are needed to make that happen? Can you comment on that?
Well, Frank, the Chinese challenge is going to be developing in ways that are seen and unseen. There are Chinese academic space engineering journal articles that advocate for the placement of a lunar space station at the L1 Lagrangian point, which is a sort of point of equal gravitational pull between the Earth and the Moon. I mean, when you go out into your porch or backyard and look up at a bright moon, if the Chinese were to put this space station at L1, you could take powerful binoculars or sort of a medium hobbyist telescope and see this thing. It would be there right in front of your face. And it could potentially be armed with cannon or missiles, energy weapons, and it would be a toll booth that we would have to get around in order to access our future bases on the moon. Right now, both China and Russia and the United States have plans to put nuclear power plants on the moon. We need nuclear power plants on the moon because of the rotation of the moon. The lunar night lasts about a little over a week. There's no sun, there's no solar energy. So a nuclear power plant is a logical and a very necessary addition to be able to sustain an unmanned and a manned presence at our future lunar bases. Unfortunately, at least the early version for a Chinese moon lander has essentially two stages. One stage is the can with the man that lands on the moon. The second stage is is a propulsion module about the same size as the manned lander. The Chinese plan to put their moon lander in orbit many months before they send the manned spacecraft to dock and then transfer the crew to go to the moon. But the propulsion module will also be used to slow the manned module down to get it closer to the surface of the moon before the engines on the moon lander then take over and achieve the final landing maneuver. But just before the manned cabin, as they call it, takes over the mission, it will detach from the propulsion module, and the propulsion module will then crash into the moon. This was a method originated by the Soviet Union in their early manned moon program that quite literally never got off the ground, but they definitely tried. And so I look at the next decade in which China, Russia, and the United States are building a greater presence on the moon, deploying these very necessary nuclear power modules. And there's the Chinese just basically bombing the moon. Now, they may try to reassure us that their propulsion module will make a controlled crash nowhere near anybody's essential settlements. But that's a threat in itself, that
Yes.
they could conduct a quote unquote accident that could target our nuclear propulsion system, nuclear power system on the moon, and create great havoc for our lunar program, the willingness of our partners to cooperate with us, especially if this so-called accident involves loss of life.
Any comments on your part about that, Doctor?
No, I am in full agreement with that, and I think that that is where we are. I don't see any reason why we can't counter all this, but their system is well designed and they've been executing well, and it is simpler, and there's every reason to believe they will get it done, as he mentioned, a year or two ahead of schedule, which just doesn't.
So let me ask you this. I think it was you, Greg, who was talking about this enormous wealth to be tapped in space. Could you explain a little bit more about where that resides? Is this mining the moon, mining asteroids? Is it some other kind of, I mean, tourism, commercial operations there? And would that create perhaps an incentive for getting much more serious about this, that you'd think national security considerations would be sufficient, but evidently not.
Yeah,
Yeah, Greg, please.
did you have something to say?
No, go ahead,
Go
Greg.
ahead. Go ahead.
We'll get to Rick in a moment.
Starting with the national security considerations. So the U.S. Space Force has been created. It was a very important thing to do, to create a group of people whose mission is very clear, whose leadership understands the domain from the top down. Back when most of the space assets were under the Air Force, you had some over in the Navy and some over in the Army. And all of those people were led by leaders who did not understand what they were doing. That wasn't great. So we're in a better position. The question is, what is the purpose of the Space Force? And kind of within the Air Force point of view, the purpose of the Space Force is to help provide tools that allow for air superiority during terrestrial conflicts. And from the Army and Navy standpoint, it's to augment their forces on the ground. When you start talking about the fact that we're going to have an economy in space that's producing value by extracting resources from heavenly bodies and creating new things, and you need to defend that from a peer competitor, you start getting an area where there are people in the military and Congress who will oppose you talking that way. They want space to be a kumbaya global commons, or they maybe just don't want to worry about it, but they don't want to give Space Force that mission. Space Force needs to have that mission. On top of that, though, we need to realize their job is simply to allow the commercial industry to prosper. You can't do it on your own. You can't occupy and hold a territory, which is the military. You can destroy a territory, you can occupy it, you can kill everybody, but you won't hold it unless you actually own it and develop it. And that's just been proven so many times in history. My undergrad's in history. I went and I gave a talk to the Space Force a year ago, and I started out with a picture of Laura Ingalls Wilder's little house on the prairie, the actual house you can go visit. I said, this is what won the West. It wasn't the 7th Cavalry. Custer got his ass kicked at the Little Bighorn, right? And you can go kill a lot of people, but you don't own the territory until you occupy it. It's the farmers, the ranchers, the telegraph, and the railroad. And we're at that point in space. It's hard for people to imagine that, wow, we're going to go get stuff off the moon, make something out of it, and bring it back to Earth, and that could be valuable. But it was totally hard to imagine that you would go all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World and do agriculture or manufacturing and ship those products back. At first, it was, if it isn't gold, we don't care, because it's not worth doing anything else because of the high transportation cost and risk. But as that got more and more regularized and de-risked, now we literally ship concrete across the Pacific Ocean because supposed market forces. That's insane, but the cost of transportation has gone from dear to zero, and the risk has gone from extreme to zero, and the market changed. So we're going to get to the point where, in fact, those metal elements that are sitting nicely at the south pole of the moon, that can be extracted without damaging anybody's biosphere or rainforest or anything, and are actually easier to get to and can be processed in microgravity, where you can make amazing materials that you can't make on Earth, metal alloys that can't be formed on Earth because the heavier atoms would want to sink to the bottom of the ingot, basically. It could be made in space. Pharmaceuticals and biomedical devices that I could do a whole hour-long show on, that are going to change our world in the next few years. I think we may see a cure, for instance, for macular degeneration or retina pigmentosis that blinds millions of people, come from space in the next few years. Very promising cancer cures, very promising cures for arthritis, Alzheimer's, and other things, because of the chemistry and biology you can only do in microgravity. Those will come back to us, but we need to be able to defend it.
Frank.
Yeah.
The Chinese are have long been investing in two space economic projects that could be transformative on Earth. The first is they are investing heavily in trying to be the first nation to master fusion energy, essentially creating the chemical reaction of the sun within a contained vessel, contained by magnetic power, but with the ability to produce just exponentially far greater power than even a nuclear fission reactor. And they envision using helium-3 mined on the moon, where it is said to be quite plentiful, transporting that helium-3 back to Earth in order to efficiently and immediately achieve nuclear fusion superiority. That alone would put the oil barons of the Middle East out of business. Now, the second transformative project would be simply building phenomenally massive solar power gathering satellites in space, and then being able to beam that power through the atmosphere to collectors on Earth. When I spoke with Chinese engineers a little over a decade ago at the International Astronautical Congress, they told me that, yeah, they were within 5 or 6 years back then of being able to master the transferring of electrical power from space through the atmosphere to Earth gathering systems. I don't know for sure whether they have in fact achieved that, but they have multiple institutes, multiple experts, multiple PhD projects dedicated to this problem. And we know for a fact about their plans to deploy the massive solar power gathering satellites.
They will do that, and those satellites are dual use. They can both power a city and fry one, depending on how you tune and focus.
Indeed.
I remember Lieutenant General Steve Quast, one of, I think, the more visionary senior officers in the U.S. Air Force, talking about those power options years ago, and it sounds as though this is now in prospect. Let me ask you both to comment on something that Roger alluded to. If to some extent what's going on here is understandably, there are a few other things going on, but the president is not giving this focused attention. And it would seem, things like setting up the Space Council, for heaven's sakes, should be, an afternoon's work rather than something that's still not done 7 or 8 months into the administration. But he has made a personal priority, as you both know, of course, of having a missile defense. He calls it the Golden Dome, part of which is going to be in space. And if Roger's right that what you're talking about, if there is a Chinese military capability, an offensive capability behind your lines, as it were, for Golden Dome, that would conceivably, compromise the whole operation, and would presumably be something that would be very much requiring the president's immediate attention, would it not?
Most certainly. Yes, by initiating, committing the country to a national missile defense to include a low Earth orbit, a medium Earth orbit element. Yes, you're all automatically creating a new front line of the moon and also beyond. So yes, Golden Dome requires today, and will definitely require tomorrow, a cislunar collection of capabilities to not only, to first anticipate any threats from the moon, and then, of course, the ability out there and beyond to deal with those threats, to take down those threats.
You said threats to the moon. You're talking really threats from the moon
From the
as
moon.
well.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's threats from the moon, there's threats to our assets in the moon, and then there's threats to our Golden Dome assets in space. Because when you're on the moon or at higher altitudes than where Golden Dome will be operating, then you've got the high ground on that. So your defense posture has to continually evolve. But we've got to be fair.
One gets the sense that President Trump understands this.
I think that he does, and I don't want to fault the president for the fact that we're not moving forward with alacrity on these programs. They're very busy. They were handed a shit show from the last administration. Sorry for using that word, but I don't know what else to say. We've got the border problem. We've got a crime problem. We've got a massive trade problem, and China is working us on a dozen fronts. So,
well, when Obama canceled the moon program, he gave the Chinese 10 years. That was a massive self-defeat.
But I'm not going to point them at the current administration. Yeah, let's get on with it. It would be nice to see the vice president step up with the Space Council, because that is by law the role of the vice president. It's the only legal obligation the vice president of the United States really has, is to chair a national space council and hold a meeting once a year. And it's time to get going on that if we're having a meeting this year.
Indeed.
Well, I'm perhaps a little more inclined to be critical here, but if that is indeed a statutory duty of Vice President Vance, and given what you've laid out, and as if Roger and Jim Fanell here in this webinar, the idea that this it would be sufficient unto the day to have an annual meeting of the Space Council. If it's not, a weekly meeting, it would seem to me it ought to be at least maybe once a month. But let me just, if I could, and you can, spare the lash as you wish, but it does seem that this is a policy problem first and foremost, and that the technologies are available to us if we have the wit and the will to pursue them. If that's so, then isn't really one of the first orders of business coming out of this kind of conversation to recognize that we are, in fact, having the unrestricted warfare against this country that the Chinese Communist Party, as I said at the outset, has been waging against us for decades, very much manifesting itself in space, and likely to do so much more in the days, months to come, and that this has to be addressed as a matter of the most urgent national security importance, including by getting an organization like the Space Council that is expressly, I think, meant to address that sort of thing, fully engaged.
Yeah, I just want to say the Space Council is the top people in government. It's cabinet members. It's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Sec Def, Sec Transportation.
No, I appreciate that.
They're not going to meet every month, but their people need to be. So you need an executive secretary of the Space Council who's very effective, like we had Scott Pace from George Washington University during the first Trump administration, amazingly effective. If you got somebody like that there to make sure, Frank, that all the things are rolling forward, so that when the actual cabinet level people come together once or twice a year with the vice president, they approve things that are smart and ready to go, then it'll work. But yeah, the mechanism needs to be in place.
And again, Rick or Greg, as you wish, the issue of the role of a space command. You talked about Space Force a moment ago, but a space command. General Whiting, of course, appeared the 4-star commander of it in Maria's program. Are they stepping up? Or is this something that, by virtue of the fact that I guess it's still sort of nestled in the Air Force, some of its activities at least, and that competes with the other priorities of the services, constricting what should be the leading edge of making the national security case for the kind of changes in policy and programs that you're talking about here?
Well, Frank, especially this year, we've certainly heard a great deal of aspiration from across the board from military, space, command level leadership. They're very reluctant to go into specifics about what it is they're actually going to be putting up there to defend our assets. Surprisingly, though, Maria Bartiromo's program included some rather interesting revelations from Palmer Luckey about what his company on a classified level has been building. And as to my knowledge, this has really been the first, I hope, publicly approved revelation that there is at least one company that is seized with the mission to develop defensive assets and is actually doing that.
Yeah, it was encouraging to hear from him. Greg, any thoughts on your part on Space Command and how it might help move things along here?
Yeah, I just think that they need a clear mandate that their job isn't just to provide advantages to terrestrial warfighters and air superiority, but rather that they have a job of protecting U.S. interests and commerce all the way out to the moon.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, everybody pays lip service to this, I guess, these days, that if the balloon goes up, as they say, if we do find ourselves in a shooting war, it will be a shooting war in space with the Chinese communists, will it not?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no disagreement about that. Well, gentlemen, listen, this has been enormously illuminating. I want to say thank you again to Maria Bartiromo and the real call for action that she's put out on her important platform, as well as all of those of you who participated in it or who have been laboring in these vineyards for years. It's hard to overstate the importance of what we've just discussed. The degree to which truly what goes on here on Earth will be impacted by who controls the heavens is something that I just don't think can be characterized as other than a top priority. And I also just wanted to say, Greg, thanks to you and to Peter Navarro and the work that you've done going back to Death by China, if not well before, in making clear that this sort of libertarian passivity, as you put it, I think, in terms of the Chinese practice of destroying our companies, serially, industry after industry, sector after sector. Another very, very important aspect of this unrestricted warfare against us. And again, altogether too little appreciated by most Americans. I just closing comment by me, I guess I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the Rust Belt was a feature of part of my latter years there. And there was, I don't really remember anybody talking about it as other than just sort of a regrettable thing, as opposed to a direct result of the takedown you mentioned of our steel industry, among others. And we cannot afford to let that happen to these relatively nascent but impressive commercial space systems, especially to the extent that they are likely to fill a pretty urgent need for dual use purposes, as well as Mr. Lucky's contributions to that program suggested. Thank you, Rick Fisher, for your, collected works in this area especially, but more generally with respect to helping raise the alarm about what the Chinese Communist Party is up to militarily in particular. Greg Autry, same to you. again, this body of films and books and running commentaries, as well as your service in government, is deeply appreciated, as is that of Roger Robinson and of course of Captain Jim Fanell. These are four of our finest, and we're very proud to have been able to share their insights with you about this incredibly important topic. I hope you come back to us next week for more on what the Chinese Communist Party is doing in the way of unrestricted warfare against our country, and how American elites are enabling much of it, including with your money. God bless you all. Thank you to Oleg Atbashian and our friend Didi Logason for their help with this program as well. We'll talk to you next week. God bless.